Hey friends, happy Friday. I'm coming to you from my home office, and I had a friend and colleague today send me a screenshot of a post in another group that I'm not a part of, and there was a question posed about the validity of respiratory labs technology in our mycotoxin testing, and the administrator of the group um, had commented on the post, and I'm not in the group. I can't even see the group, so I think I must have been in it at one point, but am not able to access it. So I wanted to kind of address these questions asked for anybody interested in learning about it. And talking points are so much easier for me to explain, and they're complex topics. So let's get into it. So um, the, uh, the doctor that runs this group had responded to the post inquiring about the validity, saying that respiratory labs technology was expensive and that it had a very limited scope of mycotoxins that it looks at. Um, and so let's go at it. So first and foremost, it's really important to understand there is no one perfect test. Um, and and I think that there's sometimes a disconnect with these healthcare providers that are helping families like mine, and kind of having this understanding in the environmental side. And I'm not sure why there's that disconnect, because doctors are really good at taking a lot of different data points, and using those data points to come to a diagnosis, right? And it's important to understand that obtaining an environmental diagnosis requires the same order of operations and kind of the same clinical thinking. Okay. And so um, when obtaining an environmental diagnosis, it's really important to understand that there is no perfect test. There's strengths and limitations with each and every test on the market. And it's really important for your indoor environmentalist or whoever is guiding you through this process to have the understanding of the strengths, limitations, and then using that against a very clear objective when developing a sampling plan. So I'll be the first person to tell you that. Yes, I work for respiratory labs. My bottom line is absolutely affected by how many tests I sell. So, full disclosure. But I will be the first to tell folks that you shouldn't overtest, because navigating environmental illnesses requires a multifaceted approach. We are tasked with diagnosing and healing both our home and body. So, if you put all your eggs in testing your environment, then you're not going to move forward if you don't have money to heal that environment, or to invest in proper ventilation, or eat healthy, or have the appropriate labs drawn by your doctor, and pay for that care. So I'll be the first person to tell you that. Also, even though I'm in the industry, when people reach out to me and they say, Andy, I need to test my house for mold, what test should I do? I don't automatically recommend any one test. And I don't, because I want to know what's your objective. So, for example, if you own your home, and your final goal is to remediate any mold issue that persists, then your objective is very simple. Well, not very simple, but very clear. You should identify sources of moisture, building defects if they persist, and then determine exactly what building material is affected by mold, because that's what you need to know to remediate. Um, Objectives for renters can be a little different. Obviously, renters don't really care what the scope of work is, because a renter is never going to pay for remediation on their rental home. So, a renter's objection in testing, or objective in testing, might be, well, maybe they need a data point. They know that the home is contributing to health issues. They don't really want to fight with their landlord, but they need to break the lease. Maybe they're just starting to explore some mysterious health issues, and they just want to know, like, is my environment contributing to health issues? So different tests on the market are going to look for different things, and it's really important when you're spending money on these tests to understand the strengths, limitations, all the nuances, because you're making really big decisions. And in a world, a very unregulated world, where you have conflicting opinions and everybody trying to make money off of families like mine, it gets really hard to navigate. Like, health and built environment side, you have very conflicting opinions. There's different ways to go about diagnosing a home. There's different ways to go about cleaning or healing a home. Same with, some doctors diagnose SIRS and mold toxicity using these labs, and some with those labs, and that's fine. Um, so I want to just make really clear that yes, there are always going to be strengths and limitations, but it's very important to understand those things. So let me let me get a little bit deeper into this and explain what I mean. So when you're looking at different tests and you're considering their strengths and limitations and weighing those against your objective, in other words, when I say objective, what question are you hoping to answer with this data point? And how is this data point going to help you move forward? So, for example, say you've got a family that is, life is expensive. I got 3 kids. We don't have a lot of money. So, say they had a toilet overflow, and they know that the mold and water damage is right here on the subfloor. They can see it. Don't test it. Put your resources into removing that, like move forward, right? But there are absolutely appropriate times and places to test for things. So when you are choosing a sampling plan, and you want to think about these things. And I know I'm all over the place right now. I want to just quote a couple textbooks, because I am a fan of being a source of the source and not the source. So don't take my word for it. But let's talk about indoor environmentalists, okay? Folks that you are paying to come in and identify the issue. So I'm going to quote, this is an oldie but a goodie, Bioaerosols Assessment and Control. So in chapter 2, under the chapter of developing an investigation strategy, it says at each step in an investigation, the participants should define their objectives and state their goals and expectations for the next activity. Okay. Um, the overall objective of an investigation may change as further information becomes available, but the reasons for conducting an investigation should be defined as clearly and as specifically as possible. Okay. In the same chapter, it says this: when allocating resources, a balance should be sought between supporting a thorough investigation and reserving time and funds for remediation and prevention efforts that may be needed. Don't put all your baskets don't put all your eggs in the testing basket. Super important, right? And that is what I preach. The second textbook, and this is the one that I'm reading right now. I love this textbook. This one's Bioaerosols, Fungi, and Mycotoxins, Health Effects Assessment, Prevention, and Control. It was written by Dr. Eckhart Johannian. I love this one. So, and this is in the very end, and a conclusion to one of the chapters. I love this. Listen to this. First, trust the occupants. If there are complaints, there's a cause, even if it's not obvious. Find it. Second, a thorough inspection of the premises and their ventilation is mandatory. Keep in mind that mold needs water and porous organic materials that can be hidden in the structures and not directly visible. Almost any building material can harbor fungal growth if the available water activity is sufficient. Now, listen closely to this part because I love it. Use the proper tools to find it. Third, if sampling is needed, be versatile. No sampling method is perfect. Adapt the sampling strategy to the situation. Okay, so each data point costs money, and so you have to really understand these things. And let's talk about AMIA. So AMIA is Airborne Mycotoxin Environmental Analysis. It's really neat technology. Is it perfect? Nope. Is it the only tool that you should be using to obtain a diagnosis? Nope. It's the same in medicine. Can you imagine if there was just one blood test that would just diagnose an issue? It would be amazing. So why are we placing those expectations in the built environment? I'm not sure. So AMIA utilizes an IOM sampler. That stands for the Institute of Occupational Medicine. They're the folks that developed the sample collection methodology that came about in the 80s. And it was very specifically designed to mimic natural inhalation. So it's pretty neat. It's been used the past couple decades by industrial hygienists. What they'll do is they'll clip this IOM sampler to an industrial worker's lapel and then have them wear a pump for 8 hours a day to look at what toxic compounds are being exposed to during the workday. That's not how we use it at Respiratory Labs. What we do is we take 60-minute samples at 2 liters per minute, and it looks for these mycotoxins. Now, limitations, right? There's limitations with everything, and AMIA is no different. So The strength, which I really love, is that sample collection. Because I'll tell you what, when I walk into a space and there's mycotoxins there, I know I'm being affected. It's crazy. It's weird. It's very neurological. And why is that? And I suspect it's because I'm breathing in mycotoxins. So if I want to know if there's mold in the environment and it's producing mycotoxins that are affecting me, the best way for me to answer that question is to test the air for mycotoxins. Okay. Stick with me. Um, so uh, yes, this doctor is correct. The scope of mycotoxins that this testing methodology looks for is very limited, and let me explain why. So, with this sample collection methodology, the way that we extract that sample in the lab, we have to use something called ELISA, which is enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. That is the lab analyses that we use to look at these samples, and this is important. This is often overlooked by both IEPs and doctors when they are interpreting this data. So, um, and it's important to understand these nuances. So, ELISA is it's enzyme substrate specific. So, I want you to think of it as puzzle pieces. So, I've got my known sample of puzzle pieces in here. Okay, so I've got my known puzzle pieces, and then I take my unknown sample and I'm going to put them in here. And when puzzle pieces match up, that's a positive. That's ELISA. It's a microbiology process. Okay. But to test for certain mycotoxins, you have to have those known puzzle pieces. You have to have these ELISA kits. Okay. There's not ELISA kits for every mycotoxin on the market. Not on the market, in our space. And I hope that that changes, but that's not a respiratory labs thing. That's just a science thing. For example, I would love to see an ELISA kit for the mycotoxins produced by Chitomium, because that one is nasty. But I digress. There's not, and developing these sampling kits is not cheap. It's not a thing. So that's a limitation of ELISA. Another limitation of ELISA is that if you pick up a molecule in the environment and it is similar in structure or whatever to what you're testing for, and it's like the puzzle pieces like almost match, it can produce a false positive. From everything I've read in my experience, I don't think that happens a lot with mycotoxin analysis, but it's just a limitation of ELISA in general. Okay, so let's move on. Another sampling methodology that is in the field for mycotoxins is mass spectrometry. So, liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. That's a mouthful. It's so neat, you guys. This is an organic chemistry process, and actually got to do this in college, and it's really neat. And what, excuse me, essentially what they do is they put the sample in a machine, and it will tell you the exact uh, molecular formula for what you're testing. It's so cool. It renders highly specific data points. So it'll tell you it's this many carbon atoms and this many hydrogen atoms and this many oxygen atoms. Okay. And with mass spec, you can look at a ton of mycotoxins. The panel is very large. That's so exciting. What I learned, unfortunately, through my own process, because I had, and that's actually how I came to be at Respiratory Labs. I was already in the industry as an advocate and an educator. I had access to just a great number of resources. I have a special interest in environmental testing. And so my health started to decline again. I felt off. And then through a series of experiments and getting out of the house, was very confident something was wrong in my bedroom. So we had a slew of inspectors through that space using all the foundational tools, thermal imaging, moisture meters, particle counters. We did spore trap air samples, wall cavity spore trap air samples. Those didn't show anything. And then I also did a dust test using this mass spec, which I was like, oh, this is, I was a chemistry major in college. I was like, if anything's going to show it, it's going to be this. It showed nothing. And I was so stumped. And then I did the EMEA through Respiratory Labs. And this is, again, before like I was excited about Respiratory Labs technology. I'd never seen a detect. I was like, I don't get it, but okay. And it came back off the charts, like high in all the mycotoxins that it tested for, which essentially led us to exploratory remediation, which found the hidden sources of water damage. And I feel really well now. So fast forward, I chased Respiratory Labs for 12 months, begged them to hire me, and here I am. So here's what I've learned since. The strength of mass spec in being and rendering these highly specific data points is also its limitation. So I have been reading about something called masked or modified mycotoxins. So essentially, what these things are is they're still mycotoxins, but their molecular formula changes a little bit. Okay. And you might ask, well, Andrea, why is that relevant? And how do they get changed in the environment? Well, they become modified or masked in the environment for a lot of reasons. Other biological contaminants in their metabolites, sunlight, ozone, maybe an oxidizing agent, whatever. And the problem is if that's masked or modified mycotoxins that just kind of change their structure a little bit can retain their toxicity. They can become more toxic, which I absolutely believe was the case in my bedroom because I was sick as heck in there. And in some cases, become less toxic. So, mass spec is great, but it will not detect those modified or masked versions. Now, ELISA, on the other hand, will recognize both the parent mycotoxin and its masked and modified counterpart. So, super interesting. And this, by the way, is why I'm such a fan of removing mycotoxins. I don't want to like play indoor chemistry experiment with my indoor air. I just don't want to do that. So I'm very hesitant to use these magical fogs that will just remove mycotoxins or some of these air purification technologies that do all this stuff in the air. It just makes me nervous because it's like, well, what are we turning it into? So let's keep going. So let's talk about ERMI for a minute because a lot of people do ERMI and then they're like, okay, now what? The one thing I love about ERMI and hurts me is it will put people on the right path. But what do you do after you get a positive ERMI? And that happens a lot. So let me explain ERMI in a way that you can better understand it. Okay, so and I've made other videos about this, so I'll keep this short. But it's looking at dust, which isn't always congruent with the current situation. Sometimes it is. A lot of times it is. And this doctor, this doctor that has this group, the one thing I really like about him is he's like, if you're going to do ERMI, if you're going to do dust, here's how you do it: collect new dust. And I gotta give him props for that. But the lab analysis used for ERMI and hurts me is quantitative PCR. So it's really neat technology. It is looking at DNA fragments. Okay, so unfortunately we're left to draw a lot of conclusions, and we do this with all data points, right? Like spore trap air samples that identify mold spores by the species. We're just like, well, there's stachybotrys, so we're going to assume that stachybotrys is producing mycotoxins and so on and so forth, and it is what it is. um, ERMI, looking at these DNA fragments, the first assumption you're going to make is that the dust is from a current situation in the home, and sometimes it is. The second assumption you're going to make is that these DNA fragments are representative of these molds actively being present in the home and growing. Okay. And the third big assumption is that these toxigenic molds in the home that may or may not be growing are going to actively be releasing mycotoxins. So yes, ERMI is great because it will get people, like, sometimes people are just like, they're sick and they don't know what to do and they start with an ERMI. And I'm with you and I hear you, but what do you do after that? What do you do after that? And so here's the best analogy I have for ERMI. So please don't think that I'm talking down about it. It's just understanding these things, understanding these nuances. So um, okay, a young mother is coming home and she's got her children with her, and she pulls into her driveway and she sees that somebody has broken into her house. The door's open and she's terrified to go in with her babies. She's thinking that an intruder is in the home ready to hurt her. So she calls 911. The police come and she is standing in the front yard and she's clutching her children, and the cops come in and they do a sweep of the house, and the cop comes out and he's like, "Oh my gosh, ma'am, oh my, oh, I found this big footprint belonging to this big man in your house." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, well, is he still in the house?" And the cop's like, "I don't know. I don't know." Well, is the footprint from today? I don't know. Well, do we just need to clean the footprint up? Is that okay? Like, is he gone? I don't know. So that's ERMI. So yes, it can represent a historical perspective. It can absolutely represent a current perspective. Okay. So after you do your ERMI, what next? What do you have to do? And I tell people, work with an indoor environmentalist that A, knows the built environment. This is just like a doctor expecting a doctor to knowing the anatomy of the body. They should know changing building codes. They should know how to identify building defects, know where to look for moisture and why it's there. And they should be very knowledgeable in that. That's so important. And they should also be knowledgeable in the tools that they're using, because there's strengths and limitations to everything. Even the foundational tools, they should be using thermal imaging and moisture meters and particle counters and borescope cameras. There's limitations with those tools, and also, excuse me, there's limitations with each sampling methodology that they use, and that all costs money. So, in my very humble opinion, and I've said this before in other videos, I believe that there's an order of operations that should be followed when obtaining an environmental diagnosis. Okay. Start out holistic, look at the whole house because it's a living and breathing entity, using those foundational tools with somebody that's knowledgeable, and then sampling as needed. It's just like this. Hear me out. You go to the doctor and you say, I don't feel good, doc. They're not going to start with exploratory surgery or an MRI, right? That insurance would never go for that. They're going to do a physical exam. They're going to review your medical history. They're going to take your vitals, and they maybe will run a basic blood panel. Now, if you're like me and you suffer from SIRS and mast cell and Lyme disease and mold toxicity, I guarantee you they're not going to figure it out after that first visit. So you go back and they say, you know what, Andrea, your labs looked really good. I didn't see anything here. Based on what you said and seeing that, I'm going to order this test next, or I'm going to refer you to this specialist. So we need to be following this same order of operations in the built environment. And so, in my very humble opinion, a good IEP is somebody that has access to a variety of tools. You'll never hear me say, just use Respiratory Labs technology. That would be great. I would have a lot more money if that was the case. But I don't feel that way. You should be working with a provider that has access to all of these things, that also is cognizant of your resources. Okay, there's limitations to a non-invasive inspection. There's limitations to every tool, every single one. And there's a time and a place to dig deeper. Okay. um in my personal life, I talk with families like my own that run out of money. They don't have the money to talk to these doctors. They don't have the money to talk to these indoor environmentalists. And I see people all the time run out of money. Okay, collecting data is just one part of it. But also, when you're making these really big decisions that affect your family and your health and your home and your finances, know what you're doing and how to interpret those things. And so, there is no one perfect tool. And by the way, the other thing that this provider said is it's expensive. And I also know experience that this provider likes ERMI. And I've never done an ERMI personally, because I've done other things, but I knew too much about it before I got into that situation. I'm very well, by the way. I'm very well in the very problematic house that almost killed me. But the cost to do two AMIA by yourself, DIY. By the way, if you order testing, you get a pre-consult with me. I promise I won't let you order what won't serve you, and then you get a post consult with me too after, if you decide to do it on your own. The cost to do two ERMI is the same as to AMIA. So it's not the cheapest, absolutely not. And that's why I don't just automatically recommend it to everybody and their grandma. Nor will you ever hear me say, run an AMIA in every single room of your house. That would be wonderful. It'd be wonderful data. It'd be wonderful for my paycheck. Unfortunately, it's just not feasible for a lot of families. So I think I addressed all those questions, and please forgive me if something was unclear. So if something was unclear and you made it through this 24-minute video, shoot it down below, and please feel free to share this with anybody that would think it was valuable. If you want to learn more about AMIA, you can reach out to me directly. I love it. It saved my life. I think it's wonderful, truly and sincerely. Or you can visit respirarelabs.com. Respirare, it's Italian for to breathe. It looks like respirarelabs.com. You can look at there, but reach out. So, okay, happy Friday, and thanks for sticking with me.